It's 1942. Europe is under the iron grip of the Axis. In every occupied city, German trains rumble through the night, carrying weapons, ammunition, and troops to the front lines. Every bridge, every supply depot, every factory, all feeding the war machine. For the Allies, these weren't just targets. They were lifelines for the enemy. Cut them off and you could choke entire divisions before they ever reached the battlefield. But bombing them was risky. Anti-aircraft fire was brutal, fuel was precious, and many targets lay deep behind enemy lines. That's where a different kind of soldier came in, one without a uniform, sometimes without a weapon. Resistance fighters, saboteurs, undercover agents, people who fought the war from the shadows. They needed tools that could fit in a pocket, slip past checkpoints, and still deliver a devastating punch. And in a hidden British workshop, engineers created something so small, so simple, that it could derail a train, cripple a factory, or halt an entire supply line. It didn't look like a weapon, it didn't even sound like a weapon, but it became one of the most feared tools in the Shadow War, the pencil detonator. At first glance, it didn't look like much. A dull metal tube no longer than a finger, no markings, no moving parts you could see. You could toss it in a pocket, and no one would ever suspect it was anything but scrap metal. But inside was pure ingenuity. At one end sat a spring-loaded firing pin, locked in place by a thin copper wire. Wrapped carefully around that wire was a small glass ampule filled with corrosive acid. When a saboteur needed to use it, they didn't push a button or light a fuse. They simply bent the tube. That tiny motion shattered the glass, and the acid began to eat through the copper wire, a slow, silent countdown that could last from minutes to over 24 hours depending on the design. When the wire finally gave way, the spring snapped forward, driving the firing pin into a percussion cap. The cap exploded, igniting a detonator, which in turn set off the main charge. No batteries, no clockwork, no telltale ticking sound. It was invisible, silent, and immune to cold, damp, or rough handling, and because the delay was chemical, it was almost impossible for the enemy to predict exactly when it would go off. From the moment it rolled off the workbench, the pencil detonator was never meant for the front lines. It was built for the shadows, for agents, partisans, and resistance fighters who lived with a price on their heads. In occupied France, they arrived hidden in shipments of food, clothing, even medical supplies. A single British agent could carry dozens tucked inside a cigarette tin or sewn into the lining of a coat. At night, under the cover of curfew, saboteurs would creep into rail yards, slip between sleeping locomotives, and wedge a detonator deep into the engine's machinery, often with just minutes to spare before a German guard's patrol. Sometimes they would use them to destroy critical bridges, planting charges on the support beams, then setting the delay so the explosion came hours later, long after they'd vanished into the countryside. In other cases, the detonators were used to disable factory equipment. One tiny blast could rip apart a machine vital to producing weapons or ammunition. Before D-Day, these little devices were everywhere in northern France. Rail lines were blown apart in coordinated waves, forcing the Germans to divert men and resources to constant repairs. A single train destroyed could delay reinforcements for days, and the pencil detonator made sure those trains never arrived. In Norway, they became tools in one of the most critical sabotage missions of the WWII, the destruction of heavy water facilities. Without those plants, Germany's nuclear ambitions stalled. And it wasn't a massive bombing raid that stopped them. It was a handful of men, a few satchel charges, and a pocketful of pencil detonators. The pencil detonator didn't win battles by itself. It didn't roar like artillery or tear through the skies like a bomber. Its power was in how quietly it could change the course of a fight. In France, it became the heartbeat of the resistance. When the Allies began planning the Normandy invasion, success depended on slowing German troop movements. That meant hitting railways, not just once, but over and over, so the enemy could never fully recover. With pencil detonators, small sabotage teams could cripple an entire line in minutes, and do it again the next night and the next. until whole sections of the German rail network ground to a halt. The German High Command was furious. They began posting guards on bridges, patrolling train yards around the clock, even assigning troops just to watch machinery. Every soldier guarding a rail line was one less soldier at the front. For Allied commanders, this was gold. Every delay, every missed supply delivery, every stranded train meant fewer weapons, fewer reinforcements, and fewer tanks where they were needed most. In Norway, the detonator's precision timing allowed saboteurs to strike heavy water facilities with surgical accuracy, slipping away long before the first explosion. The Nazis lost irreplaceable equipment and precious time in their race to develop nuclear weapons. By the war's end, thousands of missions had relied on the pencil detonator. It didn't just destroy steel and concrete. It destroyed momentum, morale, and the illusion that the Axis could ever be untouchable in their occupied territories. In the shadows of war, it was a whisper that could cause an avalanche. In a war remembered for its colossal machines, the thundering tanks, the swarms of bombers, the massive battleships, it's easy to forget the power of something you could hide in your pocket. The pencil detonator was never meant to be famous. There were no victory parades for it, no headlines, no propaganda posters. It was a ghost, silent, unseen, and everywhere. And yet it shaped the course of the war in ways far larger than its size. It was the perfect weapon for the imperfect battlefield. It asked nothing of the fighter except courage and a steady hand. And in return, it could bring down a bridge, stop a train, or cripple a factory. It reminds us that in war and in history, impact isn't measured in size or noise. Sometimes the smallest tools leave the deepest scars. And in the long shadow of World War II, this little tube of metal proved that the tiniest spark can ignite the biggest change. Yeah, and that's the story of the pencil detonator, the tiny silent weapon that waged war from the shadows. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's overlooked inventions, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where small ideas change the course of history. Got a favorite piece of hidden wartime tech? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And remember, the world is full of stories waiting to be uncovered. Stay curious.